Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering One Piece, episodes 267, 268, and 269. Nice. In these episodes, we have got the rest of the Straw Hats barreling through the gates, except they don't. They don't even need to go through those gates. Those gates, nothing. Right over them, right over the top, leaving the poor saps who struggled and bled to open the gates, kind of feeling like they're unappreciated. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to the One Piece crew for commissioning this episode. Appreciate you guys a great deal. Thank you so much. So yeah, these were very fun episodes. I actually quite enjoyed these. There is a lot of posturing going on by the bad guy, which it can always be a crapshoot, whether or not that's fun to watch or boring. And I have to say, this bad guy, I really hate him. Definitely, very much hate him. And, you know, we have sort of the gamut in One Piece in terms of bad guys that we kind of like when we shouldn't, bad guys that we find kind of amusing, even though it probably is him trying to be scary, it just doesn't work. We've got bad guys who feel terrifyingly competent. We've got bad guys who are sort of boring, and you're like, really, dude? And it's very much all over the place. This bad guy is so small. And I mean that in like the old-fashioned sense of like he is a very small person. Honestly, there is a vibe coming off him that I can't help but like compare to Andrew Tate because of everything that has been in the news recently about him. He is petty. He is kind of like pathetic and posturing a lot to make himself seem less pitiful. He doesn't actually have any like real power of his own. And so he has to exploit other people in order to feel like he has it. And also he like beats the shit out of Robin in the third of these episodes. And I don't feel like we have seen a lot of bad guys hitting women on this show. It seems like this is something that Oda tends to stay away from a lot of the time. And it feels like he has leaned into it with this guy for very specific reasons. So I really just want this man crushed. Really crushed. And I'm going to have to wait a while for that, I think. Seraphim says, he is a natural middle manager that kissed his ass into actual power. Yeah, and he's just like, he is, the fact that he is so confident in his position because of who works for him, and it never seems to cross his mind that maybe they could turn on him at any second, is beautifully short-sighted. There is something about him, actually, now that I stop and think about it, that reminds me a little bit of, like, Joffrey Lannister, Baratheon, whatever you want to call him, where he has, like, a child's grasp of what it means to be intimidating and feared, and doesn't really think beyond the most short-term repercussions of that. And, you know, while I definitely I understand the appeal for a villain, of course. I am just champing at the bit for literally anybody to put him in his place. It doesn't have to be that the good guys win so much as, can somebody just slap this dude like repeatedly? And it's kind of funny because he does get tossed around a bit. He gets slapped down by his own people, whether accidentally or not. And it's sort of amazing that he never seems to be chagrined by that. He's always annoyed, like, watch it, there's a vibe of just, that was inconvenient and ouch. But there's never really a sense from him that he sees that he's being made ridiculous by people who are supposed to be his own allies. And that it all underscores how low-powered he himself is, that this can happen to him. So that, I think, is part of what sort of underscores the Joffrey Lannister thing to me, is that Joffrey always has this, like, this concept that if he approaches things super aggressively, it's going to make him seem all the more scary. And while a part of you, when you are reading interactions or watching Joffrey on screen, is afraid because you know that he can fly off the handle and do something insane at any time, that is a fear of, like, a kid having a tantrum. It's not the kind of fear that he thinks he instills in people, which is of somebody who is like a warrior of some kind. He wants to be seen, I think, as a kind of Gregor Clegane type. And instead, he's got the energy of a toddler running around with a butcher knife. Like, So anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I wanted to talk about that off the top because he's just got a really different energy than what we have seen so far. And I am kind of here for it. So we start off the episode with the, moment where Robin and Frankie are brought into the room. It's like, we started off another episode like this, but they are bound. They're going backward more in this arc, I feel like, than we have seen in any of the other ones. And when I say that, I mean just sort of like repeating moments. And yet, there is a really interesting thing that happens. I think it's the end of the second of these two episodes. So I guess that'd be the end of 268. It ends with, what is the name of the bad guy? Oh my God, you guys, I'm wanting to call him Sandom, but I feel like I just made that up. But he is like yelling at Robin about how he's going to torture her and just generally about Spandam. Thank you, Seraphim. Just generally about the way he's going to make her life miserable. And the episode ends, and then we start off 269 with him, and it's the same script, but his delivery of the lines is totally different, which is weird because, like, I have always felt that if we're going to repeat a scene in the show, it's because they're trying to fill time and they're just recycling the footage and the voices of something that has been put to the screen already. Yet this was a moment where it's the same footage, it's the same animation and the same lines, but the actor is saying them with very different inflection. At the end of 268, he's got a sort of manic quality. His voice is rising into higher and higher octaves, and he's like speaking really quickly. And he's got like, there's a sort of, almost like he's beginning to lose control of himself. Like he's really getting himself worked up. And then 269 begins, and those same lines he delivers in a very cool sort of collected bad guy tone. And I found that kind of interesting. Like, I'm not sure if they just, if there's a purposeful reason that they decided to do that take again and have it be so different, or if they felt like, because we're starting the episode with this scene next time, we don't want to come out of the gate at 11 because that's kind of starting off with too much. So we're going to have the same lines, but we're going to have him tone it down a bit. But I'm curious if any of y'all notice that. And obviously I'm talking about the dub here, but I think that the effect makes sense watching them separately, that like he was getting himself worked up in one scene and then you start off an episode like that and it makes sense to calm it down. But I don't feel like I've ever seen that in this show before, that a scene is repeated and yet it's not really the same scene. And I'm very curious whether or not this is the case in the sub version as well. Like, does he sound totally different in the beginning of 269 than he does at the end of 268? So just report back out of curiosity, anybody who wants to bother comparing those and see what I mean. But yeah, the repetition of moments just seems like it's getting a lot more extreme in these. And in cases like that, it's actually kind of interesting instead of it feeling like, ugh, you know, but I am curious about it. So like I said, we start this one off and we have kind of already seen some of these moments, but I cannot get enough of, fucking Cuddy Flam Frankie, and the way that he just decides that he is going to go 100% in on Spandam, who is really going out of his way to gloat here. What's so funny, Frankie literally begins to bite this man's head, which I cannot overstate how much I loved that. That is just such a beautiful decision to have him not only decide to straight up attack this man, but of course, you know, he's bound. He has limited options when it comes to how he's going to attack. You could have had him do a lot of different things. You could have had him do some kicks. You could have had him use some ability that's like built into his weird mechanical cyborg body that's just like kind of not inhibited by the ropes. You could have done all kinds of stuff. But instead, you have him literally catapult himself forward and like wrap his entire jaw around this man's head. And not only does he do this, but not a soul steps up to assist Spandam at all. Everybody is basically like, I guess, look, maybe you shouldn't have taunted the man. Maybe you shouldn't have said that the dude who served as a father figure in his life deserved to die for being a rebel. Like, I cannot stop laughing. It is such a weird, it's just so good. You guys, I just love it so much. Frankie just doesn't give a fuck. He truly cannot be asked to have any chill at all. And he is like shaking the dude in his jaws like the puppies do when they get a hold of one of their toys. You know, this is like the kind of tug of war thing that I do with Pippin, with a rope. And he's just, I fucking couldn't get enough of this. If I haven't wanted to do this to enemies of mine, I mean, strike me where I stand. The idea of just literally biting them and beginning to shake like a Rottweiler or something, fucking yes. I am honestly, I'll be honest with you guys here, I'm a very bitey person. I don't know why. This is just a fucking thing that I have always struggled with, is when I have like, this is part of where those of you who come to the crowdcasts, you see that I have the facial twitch on that side of my face. my neurologist and I are beginning to come to the conclusion that this is where it comes from, is that I lock my jaw when I'm angry and grit my teeth really hard. So when I do that, it seems like it's hitting this nerve and causing this like twitching thing. So they're going to start injecting to the like muscles of the jaw. But I do this like I'm very bitey during sex, and I have to watch it because I can get a little bit too bitey. When I would get into like mild like wrestling sessions with boyfriends and stuff, if it started to get a little too aggressive, I would resort to biting fairly quickly. When I am really excited about stuff, I want to bite things. It's just, I don't know what it is, like a kind of oral fixation. And so seeing this man who is so humongous and also has like a metal jaw, kind of. It's unclear exactly how much of him is metal. Sometimes I think I get it, and then it's like, well, no, there's something behind what looks like skin, and that's metal too. But there was something very satisfying, especially since this dude sucks so hard in such a specific way that feels like kind of misogynist as well. It just really, I don't know, guys. I felt like I was getting a present, combined with the fact that nobody seems to care. And we finally get Kumadori, who is here to help, allegedly, but really seems like he is much more here to monologue and posture. And he winds up tossing this man into a wall when he finally gets to the point where he's helping him. He has this wild moment. He's got a staff that he like drives into the floor, and his hair flares out all around him before the attack begins. And I was just like, honestly, as much as this dude feels like a joke, that is a really cool look. That hair just sort of growing around him. And this moment where Spandam like hits the wall, he also hits the desk. And this knocks the phone receiver off the hook. So later on, when a bunch of people who are dealing with this huge attack are trying to get in touch with him, it isn't ringing. And I think that's a pretty good ploy there. I like that. Gabriella's in the chat. Spandam is just such a piece of shit. I can't believe Frankie would put that in his mouth. Seraphim says, I love how clearly no one respects him at all, and they only listen because they acknowledge he is their boss per the higher-ups' orders, but that's it. Exactly. And it's really remarkable that he doesn't really seem to sense how tenuous that is. Sir, you're being attacked by a prisoner in front of a room full of badasses, and you have to ask for help. And does that not bother you? Does that not worry you? Nope. The answer is no, it does not. So we go to Luffy, and he is basically trying out a bunch of different techniques as he is fighting all of these dudes. He has a moment where he is literally just bashing his head into a wall and manages to like push the top half of a building down onto a bunch of men below. And he uses his Gatling, Gum Gatling, to break it while it's falling so that it just turns into a ton of like free falling rubble. And I have to say, you know, we watch Luffy fight a lot, and he does all kinds of different stuff. But I think this is one of my favorite sequences because of the fact that he's fighting a group of dudes. What we get with Luffy so often is that he winds up sidelined somewhere, stuck somehow, so that the like groups of henchmen or soldiers or whatever have to be dealt with by the rest of the Straw Hats. And then when it comes time for somebody to go up against the big bad, all of a sudden Luffy gets free and is able to go up against that guy. We don't see him fighting the crowds quite as often. And some of his attacks really are super fun to watch on a crowd. You know, he's got a few where he's just like sweeps his leg out and just carries all of these guys. And there's a couple of moments where he's naming the techniques out loud. And most of the time with the dub, I'm like, okay, the change they made versus the sub is much better. I disagreed with that on some of these technique moves because he calls one of them a scythe, like a gum scythe in the subtitle. And in the dub, he calls it a gum sickle, I think. And I don't know, scythe just sounds more like deadly to me. There's also in the sub gum mallet, which is changed to gum hammer in the dub. Mallet sounds better. Mallets are bigger and more imposing looking. A hammer is the kind of thing that sounds like exactly the house tool that you use. A mallet, in my imagination, is a cartoonish object. You know, when I think of a mallet, I think of either the kind of mallet that you use when you're like at a carnival and you're doing that thing where you're testing your strength, which is already giant, oversized, and ridiculous. Or I'm thinking of the kind of mallet that like one of the Looney Tunes would pull out of an Acme box and is also hilariously oversized. So for me, a lot of the technique names, I was just like, you shouldn't have changed that, guys. I feel like that was better. But let's see. Seraphim says he's too stupid to understand. Gotta love how well Oda can make such an utter horrible piece of shit and yet make him still be entertaining in just how pathetic they are. Yes, true. There's a reason you have not been hearing much praise or talk about the dub. Listen, I have been preferring the dub this whole time. I'm just saying it's not like a universal thing. Like I said, this moment, I feel like they made some choices that I'm like, no, that was worse. But mostly I'm on the side of the dub. Just y'all know. So we have this whole thing with the Frankie pirates who are trying to like get this other gate open. And we like, as this is all happening, Chief Justice gets sent out to deal with some stuff. Chief Justice of Enies Lobby is a 3-headed giant. And I truly do not know what to make of this guy. He is carrying a giant sword, but he only has the one pair of arms. So I don't know what purpose the other two heads are going to serve combat-wise, but I will tell you, their name is Baskerville. On the left, I am Left Baskerville. On the right, I am Right Baskerville. And here in the center, I am known as Central Freeway. And when he says Central Freeway, these two other heads like lean inward and smash him and essentially seem to be saying that's not his name, because I assume he would be Center Baskerville, but he's going by Central Freeway for reasons which I don't get. I feel like there's like a joke here that's referencing something that is like flying under the radar for me. I don't know what to do with this guy. But I will say that the name Baskerville, and then later there's like a whole dog themed group of I guess you would say security guards. The Hounds of the Baskervilles, I guess, is the joke we're making there. Which is fine. It's like kind of lame, but okay, sure. Just the three, is it supposed to be something like the 3-headed dog, like Cerberus? Is that, are we kind of going in a circular direction with this joke? Like, I don't know, guys, if I'm reading too much into this, because sometimes Oda just does weird shit to do it. You know, there's often no rhyme or reason necessarily. He's just like, I just felt like having his entire outfit look like flowers. What? But I just feel like I'm missing something with this guy. And the introduction of another giant, considering we see the second of the other two giants taken out in this trio of episodes, I can't help but feel like this dude isn't going to be very helpful. I'm not really anticipating him being able to do almost anything. And we have a weird moment, too, where one of them is saying, I think he's guilty, like all pirates are guilty. And the other one's saying, well, I have to take the opposite view and say he's innocent. And the guy in the middle then says, I'll be neutral, but then says, I'll sentence him to death. And again, the heads sort of come together and smash him and are like, dude, what are you talking about? What is this? What is happening here? Seraphim says, I got nothing to explain this. I do figure it's going for a kind of very oblique Cerberus reference, maybe, but I do think most of this is just Oda being Oda. Okay, I kind of appreciate that you're seeing the Cerberus thing because I think oblique is like the exact right word to use here. It just feels so half-hearted that he was just kind of like, oh, yeah, well, I mean, we could have a guy with 3 heads, like Cerberus has 3 heads. We could just do that. And that's as much thought as went into it. And that probably is exactly how it went. So, yeah, these dudes, I'm just sort of like, all right, you're here and you're apparently in charge, but I am not getting the impression that you are anybody to be afraid of at all. And it sort of made me stop and think about T-Bone and how he got sidelined. I want him back, y'all. Like, I really hope, I assume that we have not seen the last of him because of the way he was introduced and the way he was got rid of. Like, it was made very clear that he's still alive and he's still out there. But I was just thinking how it was a real fight with him and Zorro. And I wouldn't be mad if it turns out that he factors into this arc still in some way. Because I found him to be really fun. Like a weird, the preoccupation he has with justice, making him eager to help to the point of like almost hindering himself, and being really good with his fighting style. I kind of miss that competence on the front lines here. So, Seraphim says, though he's not technically a giant, as Oda has laid out a specific minimum height, 10 meters, to count as an actual giant in this world, that Baskerville is too short to make. Okay, 10 meters. So about 3 stories tall has to be. Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that I have a little bit of trouble understanding, and I don't need an explanation, but I wouldn't be mad if I got an explanation. That there is such a variety of sizes of people in this universe. You know, it's one thing to say like giants exist, but we have got a lot of people out here who are twice the size of a regular person, and everybody just pretty much accepts those giant people are also just part of the world. And if it's about intermingling between like breeding with humans and giants, fine. But I would like that to be sort of mentioned. And like I said, it's not like a requirement that I get an explanation of this, but it is weird to me how much it's taken in stride when somebody meets a person who's 15 feet tall and they're just like, wow, that guy's really big. I mean, that's more than that guy is really big. That guy isn't a human being after a point. Like, there is a point where that's not human blood. That's crazy. But anyway, so the Frankie crew is trying to like open everything up to let the Rocketman get through. And the two backup singers are over here saying, hey, we unlocked the gate. They have the key that they like got from him. This one actual giant who is like still trying to fight gets gripped up by Polly, who has completely wrapped him up in a rope. And it's honestly pretty fun to see Polly fight in this section. He does a couple of really good bits and is extremely helpful a few different times. But yeah, they've got him wrapped in this rope, and then Sodom and Gomorrah both pull on him and like get him into this spin. I love at one point he's just like, hey, stop that, I'm getting dizzy. I'm like, that is the least of your troubles, sir. I keep thinking too, whenever I see things like that, about how as a little kid spinning was like so much fun. And then you would get dizzy and you would stop and your whole equilibrium would be thrown off. And it was just a kind of fun thing to sort of stagger for a bit and be like, ooh, I lost my balance. And now as an adult, that is a literal nightmare. Like I feel like I want to throw up right away. So the gate is opened, but back on the old Rocketman, they are approaching and they see the gates open. They're heading for them. They're feeling pretty confident. And then all of a sudden, the gates begin to close. And Zorro calls back to Kokoro and is like, hey girl, I'm gonna need you to give me as much juice as you can. We are really going to have to punch it. And I thought he wanted to do that so that they would go through the gate. But he is intending to go over the gate. And I love everybody is like panicking in reaction to the change of plans and demanding that he, basically they want Zorro to have suddenly developed superpowers of a different kind and have figured out how to engineer this thing to fly safely. And the whole thing that Zorro is up to here is essentially, let's hope for the best. That's the extent of it. It's just, yeah, I didn't plan ahead. I don't know what I'm doing. We're just going to sail up over this and then hope that with some luck, we land and don't die. And the fact that they do manage to go right over the gate and their friends getting it open turned out to like be kind of not necessary. I couldn't help but laugh. That it didn't bother me at all. I was just like, oh, that sucks. And I love that there is a giant who's like, oh, I'll put myself in your way. You're not going to get away with this. But he has his back to the Rocketman. So he gets got right between the shoulder blades, and the Rocketman's little pointy shark nose gets like bent upward from it. So now he looks like a rhinoceros. And I was like, that's not a terrible look, actually. I kind of liked the rhinoceros thing. Like maybe if we get a new ship for our Straw Hats, it could be a rhinoceros. That would be fun. But yeah, so this dude is very much taken out of the equation. And the other guards with the dogs, I can't remember what their title is because there's something specifically said about them being like sent out to deal with the invaders. They're already here, so they see the Rocketman land and are just like, what the fuck? Where did they all come from? And there is a sequence here, and we get this several other places as well. Y'all, honestly, as much as it's like goofy, I really enjoy it when it happens. And that is enemy men flying through the air like kernels of popcorn that just popped at the bottom of the pan. These dudes go sailing through the air with the greatest of ease, and it is like 30 feet. They all go flying upward like they were collectively dropped on a giant trampoline. And that happens here as Sanji and Zorro come out of the Rocketman. It happens later when Luffy is fighting a bunch of guys. There's a point even beyond that, I feel like, and I can't remember who was fighting in that scene, but just all of these dudes just flying in every direction. I don't know why, but it really does make me think of popcorn popping, and it is really funny. So the episode ends with like all of these dudes who have surrounded Luffy and him being cornered right up on the edge of this cliff. So the next episode, we're dealing with them trying to force him off the edge of the cliff, and the way that this backfires on them, which is really quite funny, actually, because Luffy obviously is going to be fine. You know, I'm not worried about him. They think they've gotten him off the edge, but he is still hanging on by his fingers. Eventually, one of the dudes is like, oh, hey, somebody come and help me, because he's trying to stamp on Luffy's hands. And he keeps missing. Luffy keeps just moving his hands around. And this dude is like, hey guys, give me a hand. And so all of these other dudes step up and they start to try and stamp on his hands. And he's just sort of dancing from side to side out of their reach. And as they're stamping, they break another piece off of the cliff and they begin to fall downward. So what Luffy does is he climbs up the men who are falling. It is unclear to me how any of this would actually work. I don't really feel like it does work, really, but I accept it. He gets up over the top of the cliff and they're just like firing guns at him. A couple of them land and, you know, again, being the rubber man, they just don't do anything. But it is really funny that he does not move or attempt to dodge them at all. He's just sort of looking around, contemplating where to go next. And then the camera slowly pans down to all of the dudes who are still hanging off the side of the cliff. And they're arranged in such a way that they all survived and are all hanging on, but the ones on the bottom are dependent on the ones on the top to continue holding on in order to get out of it. So like, this is it's a really stupid but fun, creative way to get a ton of the army like distracted and out of the way without actually having to kill them. It's really, really stupid. I don't care. I thought it was actually pretty funny. And just the way that, like, there's this long stretch of the camera on these dudes and the dialogue of one of them being like, take it slowly, stop moving. That wasn't me. That was the wind. I found that very amusing. So this is when we get the like majority of the battle that Luffy is fighting and the people that he is taking down. I've talked about that mostly, so I'm not going to get all into that again, but I really did think it was fun to watch. Then we've got a wonderful moment with Zorro and Sanji. And these dudes, like, they haven't told the Marines who they are, but they're being recognized. At least Zorro is. And in the sub, he's called an underling. But in the dub, he's called a henchman. And it made me really stop and kind of go, oh yeah, like, I call these guys henchmen when we're dealing with bad dudes. If you're looking at the Straw Hats as bad guys, henchman is not an unreasonable choice to make when you're discussing Zorro. But it just really took me off guard to have the word henchman used on one of our friends, one of our Straw Hat men. However, as much as I kind of expected him to take offense at that, the thing Zorro focuses on the most here is that Sanji doesn't qualify for henchman status. They don't know Sanji's name. They don't recognize him. So Zorro keeps rubbing it in that he's a henchman, but Sanji is just Pirate A, Pirate B. Every time they talk about it, he sort of changes the letter and is just very smug about the whole thing. I loved this. I think what I loved about it was how unexpected the reaction from Zorro was, because I just thought his pride was going to get to him, and the fact that he was being called a henchman or an underling, he was going to take exception to that. But the fact that he's fine with it as long as he can still lord it over Sanji is very funny. Meanwhile, off to the side, we have got Usopp, aka Sniper King, hanging out with little Chopper. And Chopper is just like, hey, shouldn't we do something? And Sniper King is, yeah, we should. We should just hide over here. This is part of my plan. But obviously, the whole plan was just supposed to be make sure that they don't see us so that we can get away from here without being harmed. Unfortunately, somebody does notice them, and a bunch of Marines fire cannons at Rocketman. At which point, Sanji gets deeply upset and is like, I can't believe that they fired at that when Nami is still inside. How dare they? They might be really hurt. And again, Zorro chimes in with, hey man, Nami's a main character. She's not a side character like you are. It's going to take more than that to take her down. I am just so here for this energy. I love it so much. Zorro just being like, hey, she's got more script than you, actually, which I don't think is really strictly true. But nevertheless, I just really, the whole energy here of Zorro being this petty is very funny. So I love when Usopp realizes that, like, he's got, I think his mask got knocked off or something, and Chopper turns and looks over at him, and he has to roll forward to get his mask back on before Chopper can realize that he's just Usopp. But in the midst of this, here comes Kokoro and Chimney and the cat, and they're pretending that they were taken hostage, even though they are obviously just fine and in no danger. Somebody comments about how weird it is to let your hostages get drunk. Which I'm like, actually, that feels like a smart thing to do. Like, just let them drink themselves into a stupor and they won't give you any trouble, but they'll still be worth the same amount, probably. And then everybody starts to get distracted because there is this huge cloud accumulating overhead. And all of these, like, bubbles heading up there that are red and blue. And it turns out that this is Nami, and she is using those weird, climate controlling tools that Usopp made her. I can't remember. What is the name of this, guys? And she's using them to make this cloud and then attack with lightning. But the thing is, it's not like a controlled attack. She is just basically raining lightning down on everybody. And even if you are an ally, you are as much at risk of getting electrocuted as these guys are. It's just a matter of getting the fuck out of the way. So, yeah, I do enjoy getting to see her use these things, because so often it feels like Nami is left out in the cold. It sort of surprises me, to be honest, that we had this weapon introduced as something specific to her ages ago at this point, and she doesn't use it that often. I wish that this would get broken out a little bit more often. But also, if they're getting attacked, like, on the ocean, I have to imagine this would be less useful because they'll be quite at the mercy of the weather. Seraphim says Climatact or Climate Baton. I like Climatact for the sound of attacked within it, even though that's not how it's spelled. But Climate Baton feels like something that'll be easier for me to remember. So I'm just going to say Climate Baton. I don't like that about myself. I'll be honest. Climatact is like just catchier and better. But I feel like I'm not going to remember that. We'll see. Maybe I will. But yeah, a bunch of these dudes get brought down. But once the smoke clears, Zorro and Sanji are on the ground as well. And I love that Nami yells at Usopp to apologize to the two of them, because in her opinion, if he had done better at teaching her how to use this, she would have been able to keep them from getting hurt. But he is just like, you're the one who did it. I'm not apologizing for shit. This was just a fun, like, little sequence. I enjoy getting to see Nami use these, even though the whole way that they work feels very tenuous. It's fine. I like her having an option. And also Sanji getting up and saying that reminded me of the shock I had the first time I met you. I was like, oh my God, dude, you are just such a simp. I'm fine with it. It's fine. So this is when they are getting on the back of Sodom and Gomorrah. They use ropes to get on these two dudes. They're enormous. Not like much bigger than an elephant. I'm trying to think of a comparison here. And they look to be about the size of like a couple of double-decker buses each. But they are heading in towards these buildings, and there's a bit of a conversation with, I think, Gomorrah. And I appreciate that they say Sodom and Gomorrah, because every time it's just Gomorrah alone, I keep thinking of Guardians of the Galaxy. But they are like able to move over the streets without there being water present exactly as efficiently as they were able to move through water, which surprised me. I thought that might be a little bit of an issue, but not at all. So they're just using these guys to basically like barrel through everybody in their way. And the guard dog guys are who they ride the back of these dogs in the way that those little dudes in Lord of the Rings, the like orcs ride the back of those sort of goblin wolf things. Can't remember what they're called, but it really reminded me of that. They are catching up. And I was genuinely like, if these little monsters begin to attack this giant fish, I don't know what kind of defenses this little fish has. What are we going to do about this? So instead, Sanji gets given the reins, and all of the shipwrights move to like the back of the animal. And Polly tells Sanji, I'm going to go in and fight now. I may not make it out. And if I don't, I want you to give them all a message from me when you get there. Tell them they're fired. Which actually I did find rather amusing. That he was just like, I don't really have anything like great to say, so we'll just do that. And he goes sailing off the back with a rope in each hand and takes out a couple of dudes as he's doing that. He's honestly a little bit more badass than I give him credit for. I think just being distracted by the fact that he is so weirdly like misogynist and slut-shamey about what Nami and any other woman, what they're wearing, has overshadowed the fact that he is actually kind of a badass. And yeah, him and the other shipwrights, they jump down after him and are just like, all right, well, we're about to really fuck your day up, guys. And then we cut to inside the courthouse again. And this is when we have the scene of, what is this? I keep doing this, guys. Oh, wargs. Thank you, Seraphim. This is when we get the scene of Spandam hitting Robin. and standing over her, and the episode ends, and then the next one picks up right where that one had left off. So this dude is there's a couple bits here where he says something about, I'm going to inflict such pain on you that you're going to wake up every morning wishing you were dead. And then I'm going, and the words he uses are torture and use you. Something like that. But he uses the word use, which I always hear as like sexual assault. And the fact that they chose that, I was like, I feel like either you knew exactly what you were doing and that's what you wanted, or you didn't stop and think about what that really sounded like. And especially in the context of the way he has like beaten her, and he's standing over her and she's laying down on the ground in her tiny outfit and like, you know, bound. It just all felt very uncomfortably like sexualized to me. And it made me being like hypersensitive to that sort of thing. But it just, the whole energy of the way he attacked her was a lot more like gross than we have seen from other villains so far, which is part of where I think I'm getting my comparison with like Andrew Tate and Joffrey Baratheon, because the both of them are also deviants and like abusive to women. So yeah, I just really found this uncomfortable. Meanwhile, he's like, oh, and we're going to completely fuck up your Straw Hat friends. And Robin is like, that is not the deal. You promised that you would let them go. And Spandam is like, Lucci, would you care to remind her what the terms of our agreement are? And Lucci says they were going to be given opportunity to leave Water 7 safely. They were. Now they're here. They left Water 7. We did not molest them. They left peacefully. They chose to come here for you. So now we are going to do what we want. And Robin says something about how he's twisting the deal. And all I could think was, he's really not, Robin. Like, that is exactly the deal. That feels like the expectation that he would just go on to not harm them after they are assaulting this high security prison. You can't have imagined that he was just going to let that slide, right? And calling it twisted logic, I'm like, there's a lot of twisted shit about this man, but that's not part of it. And even so, and he winds up saying this himself, which I'm not loving that we are in agreement on this, but honestly, a deal that a governing body makes with somebody that they are going to hold prisoner, if they abide by that deal at all, consider yourself pretty lucky, because that's not necessary. Like, they could do what they want pretty much, and they don't have to broker a deal with anybody. So if they decide to honor it at all, you've gotten more than you really had any reasonable right to expect. And she got what she initially wanted. I will say too that the reason he initially hits her is because she expresses some surprise that he, Spandam, has the authority to summon a buster call in the first place, which is the thing that was so like triggering to her that she was willing to make this huge deal to keep her friends from going through it. And I have a suspicion that he actually didn't have that authority and he just used the threat, but could not have followed through on it anyway, that it was just all a bluff and she bought it. Because that's the thing, when you have gone through a trauma, even if somebody is bluffing, you don't want to risk it because you know what the real thing is like. So why take the risk? So I have my suspicion that he actually couldn't have followed through on that if she had decided to just do what she felt like. Meanwhile, he is kicking Frankie on the ground and is just yelling at him, take this, you bastard. And then he turns and he kicks Robin and starts kicking her. But it's interesting because when he is kicking Robin, you don't actually see him repeatedly kicking her. You just see her feet sort of moving jerkily as if to indicate that her body is moving because she's being kicked. But it's not shown to us the same way because I suspect that they didn't want this like dude beating up on a woman like that to be hugely visible for understandable reasons. And when she calls him a coward, he lifts her up by her hair and is like, I can't believe that you're still talking back. Like, you really need to learn to shut your mouth. Which, in the interest of self-preservation, I agree with, but also fuck this guy and good for you, Robin. So yeah, this dude he just sucks. He's the fucking worst. What is the name of the person with the zipper mouth again, y'all? And this person keeps making this weird sound, and I don't know if it's supposed, like, you know, there are sounds that, you know, in English, for example, if you say a bird is making a sound, you say that they're tweeting. Tweet, tweet, tweet. In Spanish, tweeting is called pio, pio, pio. And I'm wondering, it's supposed to be like an onomatopoeia kind of thing. Is the sound that this character makes supposed to be the sound of a zipper? Is that like related to anything? I'm wondering if this is part of a overall sort of motif or if it's a completely unrelated thing. Because he starts to like unzip his mouth and say it at one point, and one of the other guys like hits him to get him to shut up. And I couldn't tell why he wanted him to shut up. If it was just, don't draw attention to us, or I'm sick of you saying that over and over, or what. Fukuro, says Seraphim. Okay. He's just such a weird looking little guy. I don't know what to make of him. He's got a very sort of Humpty Dumpty look until you get to the creepy mouth. So I love to, when Spandam is like, okay, I want you guys to take Robin and Cutty Flam to the prison, and beware because Cutty Flam can be violent. And then we get Frankie jumping up and biting him on the head again. Oh my God. I wanted more and more of this. Him getting bitten on the head is just everything. I loved it so much. And this is when the CP9 guys get up to leave, and he says something about how, like, you guys are doing this in pursuit of justice like me. And Lucci is like, no, we don't necessarily subscribe to the same ideology you do. We don't, like, the justice thing isn't exactly it. And he's like, well, then what is it? And Lucci says, maybe we do it for blood. And I was like, oh, dang. He's basically like, we just kind of like killing. Like, it's kind of our jam. And that was the first time that I got the feeling Spandam understood that he was like dealing with people that he was very outclassed by. But a moment later, it's gone. And he's just like, wow, now that they're working for me, I'm invincible. And I was just like, I guess. So our friends, the Straw Hats, are still on the back of one of these king bulls. And the King Bull is talking to Chopper about the way he got tied in with helping the Frankie family. And it turns out that he and the other one were like eaten whole by a sea king, which was then killed by Frankie, who ate the sea king and got full, so that when he found them, he wasn't hungry anymore and was just like, don't worry, I'm not going to kill you. I'm not hungry. And Sanji's like, so you're his like lifelong admirer and ally just because he didn't eat you? And they're like, yeah. And he just goes, okay, whatever. But then one of them says, hey, is it cool with you that your friend with the long nose didn't make it onto my back? And everybody realizes that Usopp is not with them and they do not know where he is, which feels right to me. Meanwhile, Luffy is jumping from rooftop to rooftop, and a lot of these soldiers are actually managing to follow him, which is pretty impressive, actually. And I was just kind of like, oh, okay, yeah. So they are, I mean, usually Luffy jumps from one roof to another and that's it. I mean, and he does manage to lose them for a time by doing that. But I was genuinely pleased that they were able to keep up with him at all, because I feel like he is so outstripping all of them usually that it can be almost boring, you know? So the episode ends with everybody looking around and being like, well, we can't find him. And one of the dudes in charge on the ground is like, are you kidding me? We have thousands of troops here and this island is not that big and you don't know where he is. We have got to handle this guy, find him. And meanwhile, right behind them, Luffy is crawling onto the roof of a building right in front of the like main courthouse. And he's on this roof and about to jump across the big gap between it and the courthouse when all of a sudden this like weird bull-haired guy climbs out of that like open door that he can make in the air. And this dude is honestly really such a wild character. Like the abilities are already so OP to me, but then he's always out here just like really telling Luffy shit, you know? And he says something about how like they said there were only 5 casualties, but I didn't think that could be right. We have to say this is the furthest anybody has ever been able to get inside. So that's pretty badass on your part. Like giving him a bit of a compliment, honestly. And he didn't bring any of his friends with him. It's just him. And Luffy says, out of my way, bull guy. And he replies, how long are you planning on keeping fighting? And of course, Luffy says, until I die. And that is the end of the episode. So I'm over time. I really have to wrap. But thank you guys very much for hanging out with me. Appreciate y'all a lot. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.